Welcome to the Cannabis Data Science Meetup group. Thrilled to have you all here. This is a round table for all of you brilliant minds to come together, and I'll join you too, and we can talk about cannabis data and various scientific ways that we can analyze the data. Why? Well, the cannabis industry has been moving forward. It's going through turbulent times. And the way I say is there we can let the politicians politic. We can let the lawyers practice law and all of that jazz. What can we add to the table? We can calculate statistics. And I think that adds an extraordinary amount to the picture. So today, once again, we'll put a bunch of really cool statistics in your pocket because that's what I do. I just start calculating the most basic statistics and work my way up. And I love presenting to all of you because I actually want your red ink. So please be super critical of my work because this is just like a first draft, a rough draft of some data analytics. And the way any good writer gets better is by getting critiqued by an editor. So please view yourselves as critical editors. And then if you ever have any research that you want to bring here and get critiqued by a friendly group of peers, you're welcome to. So that's sort of the mission of the group. So just going to, if you want, I always do this, so let me know if this is ever painful, but I always find it's pretty fun just to go around and let everybody just maybe say a quick word for themselves and maybe what you're working on this week or anything you want to see added to the table, any data that you're after, anything at all. So I may actually go in reverse order today, if that's okay with everybody, just kind of interested. So Ruth, if you've got your microphone set up, we'd love to hear about some of the things you want to bring to the picture. That way we can let some of the newer members speak, and then we can let the veterans have their say. Ooh, also, you may just be muted this time around.
Okay, there we go.
Perfect.
No real data issues to report. I'm giving a talk tomorrow on evolution of science and technology in cannabis and how I think the research into medical cannabis is going to end up being like penicillin, and it will have wide-ranging implications for many other disciplines and throughout society. So I'm excited about that, and but no real data work to report.
It's cool that you bring that up because we can't forget about the medical side of the picture. And as I'll show you today, I don't think it's going anywhere. We've got the teeniest bit of data points that we can actually begin to actually uncover a little bit about medical cannabis. So I just scraped the surface, so there's actually more for you to dive into. So cool data today. Thanks for joining me. Caleb, I know we're interested in, strains, right? You're running copyright, or not copyright, copyleft cultivars. Coincidentally, we'll be talking about a few cultivars today. We'd love to go a bit further in depth. So once again, we'll just scrape the surface. So this is something you can go much deeper on. But once again, we'd love to hear about what you want to put on the table for today.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. Well, I've just been working on refining the intake system for the back end, the databasing for the Galaxy that we're working on. We're working on a copyleft protected open source public collaboration Galaxy where we can have systems for open collaboration in breeding as well as sharing trait and gene information that can lead towards openly sharing the benefits of that in breeding, in understanding the meaning of the gene, and even like being able to build that out. So I've been working kind of on the back end there. Sorry, I'm a little out of breath. I just finished my workout right before this. So, but anyways, we're also working with this app that the University of Kansas put together, and modifying that in tandem with them to be usable in the field for cannabis growers to document all that information that I just said, get it into our galaxy. So I've been pretty deep into that work this last week, as well as we're building a bot, an AI-powered chatbot that has natural farming and Frickshire beta and similar information there, working with people like maybe in Thailand and Ghana, other places, to see if that we can hone it in for their farmers, cannabis included, but that's more broadly just for plants in general and more organic farming techniques. So yeah,
Really,
that's really what I've been deep on. I'm excited to see the data though, and chit chat. And, I love networking in this space and building these connections, moving this open science along. So thanks for bringing us all here to collaborate.
I love it. Tons of ideas, but I'll let Ruth chime in so I don't steal the show. Ruth would love to hear your thoughts.
That's really interesting. I'm interested in understanding if you're looking at strain genetics and profiles and stuff, are you seeing an increase in variety or a decrease in variety? So are we seeing essentially more incestuousness, or are we actually getting more variety out there?
So that's a great question. That's one of the questions that we hope to answer. But the real down in the dirt answer is that we just don't know. And there's even like been a number of papers attempting to do this that in the papers tend to also admit that we just don't have the data to know that. And so a lot of what we're trying to do at Copyleft Cultivars is create the systems where the community can then get the data together, and then we can figure out the real answers to those questions and more questions.
Now, are you looking at data just within the country? You mentioned like Ghana, and certainly in a lot of areas in Europe. I've seen studies done, and they tend to focus on, there's studies done out of, was it like Amsterdam or Sweden or something, trying to look at kind of the variety in the plants there. But they tend to go into one area and get a sampling there. And I'd be interested almost like in a global sampling. Is anything like that being done?
Yeah, it seems like you're thinking along the same line that we're doing. So our perspective is a little bit different, talking, we kind of came out of a community series of meetings, open meetings, and there were researchers, there were people who had kind of been burned out by the Phylos incident. There were like all of these different interests. There were people from the highlands of Tibet and in Thailand. And so we have like lots of different influences in the formation, and we decided that our approach should be entirely open. And so we're not going in and getting a data set. We're creating a system that anyone can put their data into and know that it won't be hijacked, that it'll be kept in these open source systems where we can't even, as the holders of it, lock it down because of the licensing terms.
Can you put a link to kind of your site or whatever it is that you're doing into the notes? So I would love to share that with other people. I'm sure a lot of people would be very interested in that. And thank you very much for doing that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's a big passion, and also it's a lot of fun. And yeah, it's copyleftcultivars.com. So I'll put that there in the chat. Yeah, we're super just open collaboration themed. So feel free to reach out. I don't want to drag the meeting too far into kind of recruiting or networking for the nonprofit, because I know we have some really cool information also that Keegan has brought. But yeah, I want to be super open also to anybody who wants to jump in and be involved with the work we're doing.
This is the fun thing about the meetup, because we can actually go off road. So, right, there's no reason we have to stay on the agenda. We don't have to stay on the trail. And I think you're doing a much more rigorous job at this, because Ruth asked a super interesting question, which is, what's going on with the diversity in cannabis? Like, so I guess you would think genetic diversity. So of course you need to do some genetic testing. But what came to my mind is we could estimate perhaps what's going on. And once again, we don't have genetic data, but we have strain data. And so that's what I'll share with you today. And so what we could just do, this is more of just a product count versus diversity count. but you could just count all the unique strains that are tested in any given month and see if that's going up or down. Once again, that doesn't necessarily mean diversity is going up or down, because you may just have, and I'll show you later, you may have like runts and white runts and yellow runts and all of that jazz. So just because there's a proliferation of strain names doesn't mean diversity is going up or down. But anyway, Yasha, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I want to second what everyone else is saying. I think what you're working on is really cool. And Copyleft is an excellent name. And to back up what Keegan's saying, I really like the concept of when you have something that you're the first to measure, if you can measure it from multiple different approaches. One is from the data and strain names. Another one could be from the bouquet of compounds found within the open data. A third is genetic testing. I don't know what else, maybe just like culturally, what are people talking about more? What comes up more as mentioned in terms of strains? But there may be multiple sources that point at the same thing that could make the work that much more certain.
Now,
Yeah, I like the idea of having compounds as identifiers. That's a great one. Yeah, we're actually currently working on with the app, trying to figure out how we make those parts collectible, so to speak, since it was built for like corn, for example, field crops like that. But yeah, I love that as a possible identifier as well. And yeah, the strain name idea is a great one. And I think you can also use tools like Seed Finder, or like we have a project going where we're web scraping Seed Finder and a bunch of other sites like that already have Creative Commons repositories of strain names and like their parents listed. And then we're putting it in Gephi, which is a data visualizer that does network graphs, and you can build like these genealogy networks. And so you can actually be like, okay, so all these strains are in this cluster, so they're not very diverse, at least by self-reported data, not always the most accurate, but then at least it's what we've got, right? And then we can take that and then be like, oh, but these strains over here are in like a list, like what Keegan's gonna go over, and oh, those ones are actually like very unique. They're not in this cluster, or they're not in our galaxy at all. Like that, I think that's an interesting way to pursue that line of questioning.
Ruth, you may want to go, because I've sparked so many good ideas here. But,
yeah. Well, I just read an article, and I posted a link to it in the comments. They discovered a new class in addition to terpenes called flavorants, which are adding, supplementing and distinguishing the smells and they think the effects, because they said if you look across strains, you have plants with very different terpene, or with similar terpenes, are creating different effects. So this is yet another differentiator, and we know that they're finding all new, I guess, markers for. They're still trying to figure out how different compounds create their effects and what are the important ingredients. And, first we started with cannabinoids, and then we moved on to terpenes, and I've heard of flavonoids, but I just heard about flavorants, and it's just, I'll stop there. I'll go on forever if I don't.
I found the first batch of COAs that had flavonoids on them. We've been collecting Florida COAs, haven't parsed them yet. We may have. We're moving so quick. It's hard to. Right. That's why it's all hands on deck, and I love having your help here, because I only have so much time to even look at the data. So a lot of the data goes unlooked at. But we are collecting COAs from Florida, and I have noticed that not all, but some of the tests do have flavonoids on there. So that's going to be a whole nother suite of compounds we're going to have to think about how to collect and standardize. And then the other thought that goes in line with both Caleb and Yasha's thought is that's an even better idea than looking at the number of unique strains by month, is somehow think of a metric that encapsulates the diversity of chemicals you're measuring. I don't even know what it would be, but I'm sure there would be some statistical, some statistic, which is basically, I don't know, variance or something. Maybe you just look at, but I don't know how you would do it cross compound. So maybe that's something for you all to kind of research. You know, what statistical concept could encapsulate just like, could we somehow measure just the total variation of chemicals we're seeing on a month by month basis? So that's a big concept. So that Yasha, that and Caleb, brilliant ideas. We'll have to investigate that further. So I don't think we can do that today. We may be able to off-road with the strain names by month. So we'll try to save time to do that. Ooh. And then actually final thought, and then Larissa and Candace, I don't want to leave you out of the picture, so I'll let you jump in. But final thought is, Caleb, what's cool is I'll get you a large data set today, but it's kind of lacking in data points. So the data set we have today, it's got like strain name, total THC, and that's pretty much it, and when it was tested. What you could do is, what I'd love to do is augment data sets. You would take this data set and augment it with your own strain data. And it's going to be imperfect, right? You would love to actually have those samples tested for terpenes. But I don't know. I think any measure is better than no measure. And so basically what you're augmenting with it would basically be averages. So you, for example, we've got Blue Dream tested. So, you know, what if you augmented that with just the average terpene values you've seen for Blue Dream?
Can I say?
Yeah, I know that. I love you. I love your red ink. So jump in, Yasha.
Sorry. There's so much to say about this. I think it's a fascinating project. I know that a huge number of flowers that are sold are not. Two flowers that are sold as Blue Dream may have nothing to do with each other genetically or through their compounds. But what I do believe we would see is a cluster of samples being nearly identical within Blue Dream, and maybe those can be identified as, okay, let's call this, you know, A1. And then many other clusters like that. Listen, I would talk about this all day. I'll stop. But there's one more thing, that a single strain may have slightly or significantly different analytes based on its age and growing conditions. But I do believe that we likely have enough data through off-the-shelf testing and open data that would be able to show, like, what is a single strain and how broad can we, how broad does it go within testing? Thank you.
You're 100% correct. And basically what you're harking on is there's going to be error, right? As soon as we estimate, as soon as we introduce estimates, there's going to be error. And the error may be non-negligible. There could be strong biases. There's a lot going on. So what I would hope is, if you say you were going to do that, would love a large sample size, because as we've mentioned, you know, the law of large numbers, but I don't know if that would necessarily get rid of any bias. So the bias may be baked in. But why would I even do that? Well, I would just want basically just a rough idea. So today we'll look at the, like, say, the top 20 strains in Michigan. And, you know, wouldn't it be cool to just know just approximately what is the chemical profile of these top strains? Unfortunately, we don't have the actual terpene data. It's not, it may not have been measured. Those products were grown, sold, smoked, they're gone. So we can't even measure them for terpenes anymore. So it's, what do we do when there's missing data? The best we can do is estimate. But once again, bias and error may be so great, it may be not worthwhile. So good considerations all around. But Caleb, you have some thoughts, and then Larissa and Candace, I'll let you chime in if you want to put
Yeah.
people.
Sorry to continue this rabbit hole, but I just thought maybe about the missing data that the consumers may also not have that information. And so the relevance for consumer choice may not be super high because they may be making the decision based on the perception of the strain, which is what we have the data of.
That's a phenomenal, phenomenal point. I don't even know all the implications, but it's definitely a thing. People definitely say they could go and ask for a blue dream. That one's maybe a bit more standard, but like something like a like GMO, like that could be all over the board, like in my opinion. I but anywho, those are just opinions. We can get to the data here in a second. But Larissa, you don't have to be put on the spot, but if you want to chime in and put anything on the table for today, you're welcome to. Basically, we're talking about lab tests, cannabis data, and specifically, I have a big data set from Michigan to share with you today. And you're also welcome to just listen in. And so just interrupt forcefully if you want to at any point. But Candace, do you have anything you want to put on the table for today?
I don't have anything. I think this is great, though. Being able to pick a product based on chemical profile versus somebody coming up with strain names would be a great future for patients and consumers.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that harks back to what's the point of all of this? Why are we on this whole rabbit? Why are we down this rabbit hole in the first place? Well, what data do we have? It's often, like we said, just the strain name. And if you go to the store, you're going to see strain names and, the THC numbers. But as we've mentioned, what's more important and what we think is the actual causal effect, right? It's not that a product was named Blue Dream that it's having a certain effect, but it's actually the chemicals you're consuming. So that's basically what we're after. And as always, we think, from my economics training or schooling, that the better information consumers have, then they'll be able to make better decisions, and on average, they'll live happier lives. Um, so that's all, and so that's why copyleft cultivars, Caleb, you're doing a really good deed, is by simply getting that information out there. You should be helping people make better decisions, right? Not everybody's going to look at the data, but the ones that are interested, they should be able to look at the data if they want to. But I didn't do the best job saying the mission, but hopefully you all have your own missions as well, and this is in accordance with them. But on that note, instead of me just being long-winded and speaking, you want to actually see the data we have here? So that could be quite fun. So let me share my screen with you. So instead of just, right, that's what's fun here, is instead of just talk, we can actually look at the data. So last week, we were fortunate enough to be able to see the data from Massachusetts. And today, we're fortunate to be able to see the total THC numbers for these products in Michigan. And we've got a time range here dating from, here, I'll print it out here in 1 second. But it's roughly the third quarter of 2020 through the end of 2022. don't have a ton of data, but we basically have an indicator if it's medical or adult use. We know which lab tested it. Everything I believe is marked. Actually, there's various types of categories. And so this is in fact a place for further data cleaning if any of you all are interested. But
I apologize. Do you mind if I interrupt really quick?
please.
So two quick things. I actually have to jump off in a minute. I will be looking for this video later. And just so you're aware, total THC in Michigan is defined as 0.877 times THCA plus delta 9 THC plus delta 8 THC. Just so that when you compare it to other states, that's how.
Can you say that one more time, please?
So it's decarboxylated THCA
Okay.
plus delta 9 THC plus delta 8 THC.
Okay, so it also has delta 8 THC, which,
but that's so rare that it shouldn't make any difference.
Yeah, it's you. From my understanding, that one was usually less than 0.1%
Yep.
when we observed it. So that will bias the numbers up, but just a hair.
Yeah.
But that's a really good note, and that's why, as a data scientist, it's worthwhile to wear many caps, and one of the caps you want to wear is historian slash well, you are a researcher, but you want to be digging through all the testing regulations and figure out things like that because they can have big implications. But good find, Yasha. But I'll move quick here. But long story short, we've got data from the end of June 2020, and then the last observation was the beginning of 2023. So I'll start limiting the time range further along. But real quick, really just going to focus on, of course, total THC today. So I'll leave all the cool terpenes to Caleb. But what can we do with this limited number of data points? So once again, I think we can go pretty far with this. So what do we have here? We have 80,000 samples that were tested in this time range. And let's just start visualizing them. So just have tons of visualizations for you today. So we'll just start going through them one by one. For whatever reason, the plotting doesn't take my style right away. So here's where we were in 2020 with about 1,000 tests per month. And you notice, while it has been turbulent times in the cannabis industry in Michigan, Michigan has seen what I would say is substantial growth over the past 2.5 years. And we still need to know what's going on this year, right? It's 2023, but we'll see that data when the time comes. But this is what you want to see in a market, right? That's growth, right? If you're a lab in Michigan, that's a lot of revenue for you. And then, as always, we say that the number of tests is essentially a proxy for the supply. Once again, it's an imperfect estimate because batch sizes may be changing, right? Maybe they're still producing the same amount of cannabis, but they're just making it in smaller batches. But if you go under the assumption that batch size is staying the same during this time period, then you would think, okay, tests are growing. Ruth had mentioned medical cannabis, and we can actually break this into two pieces here. The adult use versus the medical. And what I'll let you all make your own interpretations of this, but what I interpret this is, right, they're both around 500 tests per month. in the beginning. And I think maybe the medical and adult use, right, combined, were just filling the entire supply of Michigan. And maybe there was kind of some overlap. Maybe some adult use consumers were getting medical, maybe some medical consumers were getting adult use, maybe a little bit of crossover. And so I think what you see is maybe you see the rise of the rise in the market, and that's mostly going to adult use. And it looks to me like maybe the people that there were some people buying medical and they may have transitioned to buying adult use, but it looks like there's, it may kind of reach almost like a steady state there of, around 500 or so medical tests per month. So that's kind of my interpretation of this, is there is basically like a baseline medical community, but maybe, in the early days, maybe some people were seeking adult use, but they were classified as medical. So that's my interpretation of it. Do any of you want to chime in on your thoughts?
Yeah, you see this exact same pattern in every state that opens up, and this is a little misleading because in every state you have medical comes first. Medical predates for usually a couple of years, and medical use takes off. And then as soon as rec use comes in, medical use starts to level off, and then it declines and it essentially dies. And the adult use ends up essentially killing off medical because all the focus and resources switch away from medical. And it's very unfortunate. But it's the reality. And what's interesting here is I have exact same graphs on sales and it looks identical. So in this case, yes, the tests are a very good proxy for total revenues. But again, you see this exact same picture in every state.
Good point. I would just like to say, I wouldn't count the medical market out yet. It's maybe still about, a fifth to a quarter the size of the adult use market. So anything that large is non-negligible. And this is actually, I guess, more than 500. It's between 500 and 1,000. But Ruth, unfortunately, I think you do speak some truth in that you're right. If say you did get into business to produce medical cannabis, that would be, taking a hit. But yes, I'm gonna have to research more about the licensing, because I wonder, is it possible for a license to produce both medical and adult use cannabis, or do you have to produce specifically for one type?
That varies by state, and the laws have changed over time. And early on, they said to growers, you have to designate which plants are medical and which are recreational, and they kept them separate throughout the pipeline, so the supply chain. But I think there's intermingling. You also have differences by state with big implications. And for example, in California, what you see is the people involved in medical tend to do everything medical, and they're very different companies and organizations from people involved in rec. However, in other states, most other states, as I said, you start off with medical and the first licensees are medical, and then the medical licensees get priority when they open up to adult use. So the medical licensees are also adult use growers and dispensers. And this is kind of creating a problem because in new states, you have a lot of organizations go in there and the money is in adult use and they don't really care about medical, but they go in at medical in order to get the priority for when they open up to adult use. There's a huge amount of gaming going on. But there's huge implications for, as I said, for resources available. for medical users and adult use users, and essentially all the money is in adult use, so the resources very quickly get focused and shift over to adult use. And one last thing is, I believe that when they did the Booker Schumer Wyman proposal or whatever, this was kind of an iteration back on what the national bill for legalizing cannabis federally looked like. My understanding is that whole bill, however long it was, didn't include the word patient once. So even the federal government isn't really focused on that. And my belief is that all medical use is going to end up being pushed into the pharma industry, in the pharma model, which personally I'm no fan of, but I think that's where it's going.
It's definitely something that's going to have to be addressed at some point, Ruth, because as you pointed out, this has big implications because you're kind of like yo-yoing around these medical patients and consumers.
The problem is that if you look at, and this would be a very interesting analysis, is if you go and if you look at all the COAs that are labeled for medical and that are labeled for adult use, and you compare them, the adult use is focused on high THC cannabis, but the medical have much more variety. And, you know, there's much lower THC and there's higher ratios of CBD to THC. And there's just, and so the problem is when you get pushed over to adult use, you lose all that variety that the medical users need in order to address their particular conditions.
Ooh, actually, let's go off-roading because Ruth, you just raised one of the most interesting things. So I'll have to maybe circle back for some of this analysis on labs for Yasha's sake, because I'm sure Yasha will find this interesting. But actually, Ruth, we could, once again, it's just a 1 hour meetup after all, so we can only get so far. So, you know, don't take my analysis as gospel. But what we can do is chalk out how you could actually begin to analyze that. Because remember, we've got strain data here, we have total THC here, and we have medical classification. So we can see, are there, you know, more or less medical strains, maybe relative to the number of tests. So we talked about diversity in strains. Well, it could vary between medical and adult use. And then two, we can check out the total THC numbers. Actually, let's do that right now. So first, before we get into the conditionals, here's just the unconditional average THC. And remember Yasha's point that this includes Delta 8 too. Okay, so let's put the medical on the side burner for now, but we'll do some off-roading because that's more fun anyways. But here's the total THC. Cool, we've seen that distribution before. Just the only note is the 99th percentile is actually similar to what we observed in Massachusetts. The mean actually may be similar too, but maybe slightly higher. Ooh, and actually, this is just the first condition we've added, but here's the distributions between medical THC and adult use THC. And if you look at, it's actually kind of interesting if we look at year by year. But this one's for 2022, and so you can actually do a t-test to see if they're, you know, statistically different. But I think it's just that we have just a giant sample size, so it's maybe easy to conclude that things are different. But it could be that the difference may not actually be that much.
Can you get a count And also, can you do CBD instead of THC?
We don't actually have CBD here, unfortunately. I wonder if we could do that one in Washington. But here, I'll get you the count for them real quick. I think we have 10,000 medical samples and 33,000 adult use samples in 2022.
That's a decent percentage for the medical. So I'm surprised that they're that close.
Yeah, well, Michigan's a super interesting market. Michigan's went a mark. So this phrase gets used a lot these days that, oh, people are sleeping on something. Well, people were sleeping on Michigan in the sense that it's not your traditional East Coast market, and it's not your traditional West Coast market either. Like the West Coast markets, like California, Oregon, Washington, and Colorado. I mean, those markets are quite mature at this stage, and you kind of saw like some pretty like there are a lot of companies there, but there's definitely some big players there. And then the East Coast is much different because the story there was just regulations, right? Like from my understanding, right, really competitive, maybe to get a license, like maybe in Massachusetts, super difficult to get a license in Florida. And then, you've got
The difference between the left coast and the right coast, the east and west, the west coast is generally unintegrated. You're allowed to integrate, but you're not required. And in almost every case on the east coast, you're required to be vertically integrated. So on the west, in Colorado, California, Oregon, Washington, Michigan, you have hundreds or thousands of licensees, whereas in the east you only have tens of licensees because you end up with a few large companies because they're required to be vertically integrated, and that creates a hugely different dynamic in all respects.
and exactly. And then so Michigan just didn't fit either of those models. In fact, its history goes back to, I think there was a lot of small time growers who were doing mostly medical. From my understanding, there was like just a lot of medical plots, of like, 100 plants or what have you. So I think medical, I think, was there first in Michigan, and it's had a long history. So it's not like people there are inexperienced. So you have a bunch of highly experienced growers that were starting at a lot of small businesses. And actually now is a good time to show this. So like, for example, like look at the number of labs in Michigan. Like there's 24 labs in Michigan. And it's just not really, of course, like they're dominated by a couple of them. But, like I think in Washington, we're down, there's maybe fewer than 10 labs now. So it's, like I said, me included, I was just sleeping on Michigan. I mean, we saw it earlier with this chart here with the rise in adult use. It's a pretty vibrant market there, for medical too. So long story short, don't discount the market in Michigan. Okay, so where were we though? Oh yeah, there was let's get back to the strains instead of just talking so highly about Michigan. Okay, so we're looking at the THC. We noticed that there may or may not be a difference between THC with adult use and medical. And my hypothesis there is maybe still either the overlap, or here's actually my better hypothesis. the labs don't know how to handle medical, right? So it's, they're basically just, the labs, I think, are just testing maybe everything the same. But actually, that's not a really good hypothesis. I just realized, because the medical growers would maybe select lower THC varieties. But okay, I don't know. That wasn't a very good idea. So maybe I'll move on to the next chart here, unless anyone else has any thoughts, comments, questions. But here's just one chart that would just be pertinent to show. Once again, this is something that's come up a lot in prior meetups, so I don't want to spend too much time on it, other than point it out, and then I kind of want to move on to the strains. But just, here's just the average THC in Michigan, around the 21%, and you see some labs testing higher than average, and some labs actually testing much lower than average. And I actually, is lab 4? Oh, there's lab 4. So basically, I just wanted to make one comment here. Is basically, if you look at this chart here, so keep in mind, so basically look at these two charts side by side. So you've got the average THC by lab, and then you have the total number of lab tests. And so what you see here is, lab 1 and lab 9, they do have large market shares, and they are testing quite above average. But what's interesting is lab 4. Lab 4 has a large market share, and they're testing, just about average. So basically, my comment there is, there may be just a lot of cultivators out there who just truly want a good measure of their products. They're just like, okay, like, enough is enough of the high THC numbers. I actually just want like a good measure of what I'm growing. So I just kind of wanted to point that out, that this one lab has pretty much, like, their average pretty much matches the average in the market. And remember what we were saying about sort of the law of large numbers, and this is like the rule about the consensus, is let a bunch of people measure something, and then the average is kind of close to the true average. So basically, in my opinion, the closer you are to this red line, which could be biased, then, the closer you are to being accurate. And so I don't know, just wanted to hark on, good job for lab 4 for being close to accurate and have a high market share. So anywho, back to the strains though, because that's sort of the more fun topic, because both Caleb and Ruth, you had pertinent questions and statistics that you're after there. Okay, Caleb, this is where I asked ChatGPT to write me a quick function, but this is just to get the job done for today. This is in no way a substitute for what you're doing. So basically, what the problem here is if we look at the product name, it is wild. You've got Buds by Sensi Star, Triangle Mints Buds. This one's got underscores in it. 100 GMO Crasher bulk flower. Ideally, we could identify the strain name out of this, right? This is GMO Crasher, probably. This one's probably Pineapple Express. So on and so forth. And it looks like I even made a mistake here. because I think Archive is on our list, but it looks like this one's actually Mac Banger. So long story short is just getting the strain name out of the product name is a non-trivial task. And so this function will imperfectly do work for today, but we've had whole meetups in the past talking about how in the world are we going to get these strain names? Because Caleb, that's kind of at the heart of this is right. You're sourcing like known strain names, but there could be unknown strains that are out there that you can identify, but you may have to identify them from data like this, which is an absolute mess. What if nobody's documented GMO Skittles before? Like, why would we want to leave that undocumented just because it's got a little bit of noise in the product name? Okay, so you all move quick since we only have so much time left. Okay, so long story short, going to just add the strain name, and it's going to be imperfect here, but you can see that this is at least better than it was. So dinosaur food, that's a cool one. Never heard of that strain before. Oreos, Groundhog Day. So this is just a way that we can start accumulating strain names, because that's a challenge we've had, is just finding like an original way to get strain names. But why are we even doing this? Well, check this out. Once again, this is going to be imperfect, but you can start to just count the number of strains. And these are some of the classic strains that we see over and over again, right? Wedding cake, just I don't know what it is about it. I think it must just be really easy to grow, but it must also be a popular seller. So Caleb, this is why I was saying that if you were able to augment your terpene data, like that's what you could try to explain. Like, why are these the top strains in Michigan? Once again, as in like I'm going to use strains in quotation marks, because what is a strain, so to speak, right? See, here's the archive, which I think is actually the Mac. So long story short, this is what's growing, and here's where we can get really cool with it and maybe even try to go off road real quick. Here, in fact, while I'm talking about this chart, I'll show you basically how I code these days. So basically how I code these days is, right, I've got a to-do here. We want to look at the, adult use versus medical top strains. So, theoretically I could just, and don't let me bore you to death with this, but basically I'd just go to Chat GPT and I would just say something like, can you, visualize the top, or, the average total THC by top strains for medical products, versus adult. Let's just do medical products for now. So ChatGPT will be working on this one, and then we'll see how close they get. So long story short, here are the top strains in Michigan, and the one thing I would like to point out to you is you do see some strains, of course, testing well above average, right? So, Kush mints, GMO, even wedding cake, they're probably significantly above average. But what's cool is you actually see some here, like remember we talked about Blue Dream earlier. You do see some strains that are, I mean, Blue Dream is significantly and probably statistically below average. It's a good 2.5 percentage points. Actually, maybe even maybe it could be close to 3%. Oh yeah, so the average is about 21.5%. Well, so it's almost 4% lower in average total THC on average than the other strains. In orange creamsicle, pure Michigan, and this one Franklin Fields are also all, a good bit below average. And so this is maybe an interesting signal that total THC may not be all there is to the picture, right? If it was, then no one would ever pick Blue Dream, right? Blue Dream made it onto the top 20 despite having a below average total THC. So this is, Caleb, this is an opportunity for you. Is why is Blue Dream a top seller? People would love to know why. Why is Pure Michigan a top seller? This is what people are trying to figure out, right? Everybody's getting plants in the ground. They want to know what plants are going to be successful. And consumers too, right? It's fun to know what all the different strains there are in the market. Okay, so real quick, let's just see real quick if ChatGPT was able to make any. Wasn't a they they weren't able to do it for us. So let's see if real quick, if you have just a quick 5 minutes to add. I promised we'd go off road, so let's see if we can't find the top 20 medical strains and their average THC. Okay, so we're gonna need to do something like this, but first we want to make sure that we're only getting medical products. So let's just try this. And once again, when you go off road, we may spin our tires, but it may work out. So let's see, medical. Let's just call this medical. So let's just see if this works. Okay, so we have 8,000 strains. Let's just take a look at this and just see what's going on with this. Okay, so we've got products here. Got the strain name. Okay, we should just be able to more or less just copy and paste the rest of this code, and then we can change it to medical, and then this should more or less work. And we did it without ChatGPT. Okay, so this is medical here, and then basically I'm just replacing subsample with medical, and then that should do the trick. So and then I'll just change some of the titles here. So overall medical, overall 99th percentile medical THC. So average for the top 20 medical strains. So Michigan average totals. In medical, the top 20 medical. Okay, and there we have it. We've hopefully answered a brand new question here. Oh no. Um, ba, 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 ba. The strain counts is this last thing I need. Okay, here, 1 second. We may be able to do this. Would love to be able to do this for you. Sorry if I'm boring you. Cross our fingers. And we now know the top 20. Oh, look, I misspelled it. So we'll just bear with that for the time being. So check this out. Here are the top 20 medical strains. And check this out. Here, Ruth, you may be interested in this. And Caleb too. What could potentially explain the difference between the why medical patients are favoring certain strains over why adult use patients are favoring certain strains? You see wedding cake and Gorilla Glue still high on the chart. Orange Creamsicle has gone way up. Blue Dream has moved its rank up. Michigan's moved its rank up. And you see these two other strains that are below average THC, Russian Snow and Batched, which I've got a feeling I botched that strain name. So that's wild. And then check this out. You also see these two strains. The Kush Mints was on the top 20 before, but check this one out. You now have the SB, what's it called? SFV OG, the San Fernando Valley OG, testing at a whopping 27% total THC. So that's wild right there. But I may have gone a little over and want to be respectful of all of everybody's time. So I may go ahead and stop presenting, but we'd love to get any of your thoughts there. Did you find this analysis interesting? Was there anything that comes to mind? Do you see any fruitful avenues for further research? Love to get your input real quick, if anyone wants to chime in.
Oh, you go ahead, Ruth.
You're looking at THC, and I agree that's important, but there's other aspects there too. And so I think that if you were to say, well, why are these so popular? You need to dig past THC, and that would probably explain it. Help explain it.
Yeah, I had similar thoughts with that too. That was kind of where I was going. It's a really nuanced question, right? And so there's a lot of factors, and then there's the factors that are like quantifiable, and then there are some pretty non-quantifiable or hard to quantify elements, like social elements, right? We've got like, did Lil Wayne talk about gelato in a song, right? I mean, that just like totally skews everything. So there's a lot of layers to that question. But I like the avenue. I also think price, if we could get metric price data from that same time frame and then ratio the strains based on the average price in that time frame, we would get a lot of great information on whether consumers were simply making an economics decision, and those were like easy to produce and market affordable strains.
I love the ideas, and this is what brilliant statisticians have fun at lunch talking about. And what you're basically talking about is what do we pack into X? You know, what's our explanatory variable? We're trying to explain, in this case, is just number of tests. And that's our proxy for popularity. How do we explain that? Right now, our only explanatory variable is THC. Doesn't seem like that's all there is to the picture. This is why I would love to, augment the average terpene values, see if those matter. I love, Caleb, you had the idea, add price. As an economist, I should have thought of that one. Right? Everything's a function of price. Well, actually, price factors in. But and actually, I just butchered that. You see why I'm not an economist. But long story short, oh yeah, and then the final point you had, what if a famous celebrity talked about it? And that's basically, that is an explanatory variable, but it's how would you quantify that? So that's kind of what you could, yeah, you could maybe have fun about it, right? You could actually maybe think about some way you could actually quantify that. Like you could just have a counter, like how many times has this strain been referenced in media?
You could look at sales or tests over time, and if you have suddenly a strain spikes, then probably there was some event like a mention.
Ooh, yeah. This is once again imperfect, but like I said, it's a starting point, right? You could do something like Google Trends, just try to see if Blue Dream or Gelato is trending. But,
Yeah, the data spread is infinite. I love this about the data science. This is a great example of how it can go infinitely. We can just keep crawling for more and more information. And so my mind is like, oh yeah, we could get hashtags, we could scrape social media and network that out and have influencers have different like rating ratios for their levels of influence and other things like that. And that, of course, would be very productive, but also incredibly difficult to gather and manage and then mesh into this.
Good point, and that's right. You can't control for everything under the sun. And my comment on that is that's why we have to think scientifically. We really actually should begin with the hypothesis. So it's basically you should have some sort of like hypothesis. So maybe that's what you should all brainstorm about is, what could potentially be a reason to explain these popular strains? And so then Caleb, you had the idea like, oh, maybe it's price. So then you go try to get the price data. So it's basically you don't just go off to get data for data's sake. You first get your hypothesis, then collect the data, and then test your hypothesis. So I love it. We've got a few hypotheses to test, right? We can get price data, maybe some sort of popularity measure, and then I'm going to be thinking of my own hypotheses for, why in the world is medical, like why are the medical popular strains different? So hopeful. Ooh, most importantly, let me just here. I'll just give you the rough link, and you'll have to dig down. It's basically season 3, number 132. But the data is there on GitHub, so I encourage you all to get this data set into your hands and take a look at it yourself. This was just the first slice and dice of the data, but hopefully there's something I missed that you could find. And once again, augment this with other data sets, and that could open up a lot of doors. On that note, thank you all for coming. Thanks for bringing your brilliant ideas, some really, really, really good ideas today. Thank you immensely for helping advance cannabis science.